I'm seeing I see Sam's pin, so I'll leave it for him. I'm just gonna shut the door. That's fine. Thank you, Sam. This makes me think, I don't know if anyone who teaches here has this issue. I shut the doors when I teach, and every single time, every morning, somebody has to go shut the back door for me. And there's always like this second of like, no one gets up to do it. Who's gonna do it? I feel like phenomenologists could have a lot of fun. There's something going on there that I'm not smart enough to understand. But anyways, thank you for coming, everybody. Thank you to our people on Zoom. I hope you can hear us okay. I hope you enjoyed the food as well. But just to get started here, for the sake of time, Duquesne, a woman in philosophy, is happy to welcome you here to our spring colloquium titled Thought and Play. As a student-led organization, DWiP, to those of you who don't know us, is committed to amplifying and promoting the research and the philosophical developments of all women and gender non-conforming individuals among the Duquesne student base. Our colloquium this year takes its title from something a friend of mine once said to me, and she was lamenting and sort of what she described as an inability to think in flight during her time in academic philosophy. And I think what she meant by that was sort of, she felt like she lacked space to process, to develop, to safely hesitate, and really, you know, it takes time to develop intellectual in space. So I think what DWiP would like to do today and with these sorts of events is to help combat that silence by sort of offering a space where excellent women philosophers such as Jasmin and Kiley can present their work. So today we will have a presentation by our very own Kiley Vasquez and Jasmin Makhlouf. And we invite you to join us in creating a nurturing, curious space this evening. And I'd also like to thank the Duquesne's philosophy department for their support as well as their continued commitment to diversifying our discipline. Not to mention all the work of Jasmin, Kiley, Joe, Sam, Abigail, Jesse, there are a lot of people, CP, and I guess I'll give it to you too, Alex, for working to make sure we can have this fun event. Our colloquium will consist of 2 presentations, some correspondence, then a question and answer, very standard. And to our speaker, I'll periodically notify you with flashcards how you're doing with time. And you'll have about 20 minutes each, and then 20 minutes of questions. Our first speaker today, Kiley Vasquez, is currently an MA student in the philosophy department here at Duquesne, and will be attending the University of Oregon to pursue their PhD in our discipline this fall. Yes. Their research centers around the intersection of Latin American philosophy, Afro-Caribbean philosophy, and psychoanalysis. Their presentation will be putting Rosario Castellanos' critical assessments of feminine cultural production in conversation with Helen Cixous' call for a distinctly feminine mode of writing. Thank you for your research and your work, and you're free to come up and do your thing. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you, Samantha. Hello, everyone. In this presentation, I have 2 goals. The first is to analyze French feminist philosopher Hélène Cixous and Mexican feminist philosopher Rosario Castellanos, their thoughts on writing as a tool for female liberation. By putting these 2 influential thinkers into conversation with one another, I hope to understand better how it is that writing works to liberate women. My second goal is to test my own thinking on writing, using my own feminine experience through writing as both a philosopher and a poet. I will split this presentation into 3 parts. First, discussing the ideas of Hélène Cixous in The Laugh of Medusa. Then I will do the same with Rosario Castellanos in beyond feminine culture. And finally, I will end with my own intellectual journey as a woman through writing. I will also give a trigger warning that I do mention attempted suicide. So I apologize if that causes any discomfort, but it is essential to my experience as a female writer. To situate us, I will give some quick background information on The Laugh of Medusa. This essay was published in 1975 in France. Cixous was 38 at the time. As I will explain further, its main themes are on women's liberation through writing and understanding feminine writing, or écriture féminine. Though her focus is on women's liberation, another major theme in this essay is how écriture féminine is not only for women, but also a tool to liberate men in a similar way. First off, Cixous identifies women as, quote, woman in her inevitable struggle against the conventional man, and a universal woman subject who must bring women to their senses and their meaning in history, end quote. And moreover, women cannot be boiled down to one existence. Cixous stresses the inexhaustible existence of the woman subject. For women to write about their incredibly unique and expansive experiences is to liberate other women and to uplift women through écriture féminine. To write in this way is to liberate women from their shame, the shame of their bodies, the shame of their emotion, the shame of their experience as a whole, which has been enforced and perpetuated by patriarchal and phallocentric society. Cixous claims two aims that écriture féminine has: to break up and destroy, and to project. Écriture féminine exposes the patriarchal state of writing, of society, and it foresees and projects a woman-centered, or at least woman-acknowledged, history and future. She argues that poetry, not other forms of writing like novels, is one of the best modes of writing for écriture féminine because it calls for the strength of the unconscious. Poetry pushes past the boundaries of representationalism and reason, in which women have been forced by men who write women, this representational idea of woman. Écriture féminine is the invention of a new insurgent writing in which two levels cannot be separated. First, individually, this allows women to, quote, return to her body, end quote, to reclaim what she has lost through phallocentrism. Through writing, woman reclaims her body, her reality, her sexuality, which she has been stripped of. Without it, quote, she is reduced to being the servant of the militant man, his shadow, end quote. Secondly, by women seizing her ability to speak, thus, quote, her shattering entry into history, end quote. Cixous gives examples of women speaking in public in which she not only verbalizes her thoughts, she supports her speech with her body. Quote, she draws her story into history, end quote. By speaking, women's speech, and subsequently their writing, breaks past phallocentrism. Cixous argues that women do not build walls around themselves in a way that men do. Women possess an ability to allow herself pleasure in a way a man cannot. This is obviously coming from a Freudian sense of repression and the Oedipus complex. I am not a Freudian scholar, so unfortunately I can't dive a little bit deeper into this. I would love to talk a little bit more about it in discussion, but at least for the sake of this presentation, I will leave it at that. Not only does woman write for herself, woman writes for other women. There is an intersubjectivity in écriture féminine that not only releases the one writing from suppression and shame, but it uplifts and liberates other women from their shame. Not only are women produced by other women, quote, her self-giver as her mother and child, end quote, but she writes to other women as siblings, quote, she is her own sister-daughter, end quote. Women come from women, they produce women, and together they are all sisters. For women to write for themselves is to write for mother, daughter, and sister. She and all other are part of history. Quote, personal history blends together with the history of all women, as well as national and world history, end quote. For the sake of time, I will not go further into this incredible piece of writing. She has so many more incredible ideas. But I will summarize that Cixous and écriture féminine encourages the liberation of woman and her place in history. Once again, allow myself to situate us and familiarize us with a woman that many of those in Western philosophy have ignored or forgotten. Rosario Castellanos was a Mexican poet, writer, and activist. For this presentation, I focus on the final chapter of her book on feminine writing, originally published in 1950. Castellanos, in this work, discusses culture and how women have been suppressed through their lack of representation in culture and in history. Castellanos begins this chapter claiming that culture, and likewise history, has been created by men, and that culture itself, quote, is everywhere a refuge for those who have been exiled from maternity, end quote. And if this is true, then how are women to contribute to culture? Thus far, Castellanos argues, those women that have been included in culture and history have only been so because their writing fits the above description, writing that is stripped of maternity and thus femininity. Castellanos focuses on the idea of maternity and how it works, or is hidden in culture. Castellanos stresses the way that society has been structured in which man focuses on, quote, sentimental and economic interests, end quote, and how it excludes women and denies them their own subjectivity. For a woman to be trapped in a paternal-focused society, women are no longer counted as members of that society. Women, through the domination of men in families and in culture, are reduced to woman. She is not allowed an expression of her own unique experience. Rather, she, quote, will aspire to those modes of conduct that everyone else exalts and that she makes herself, falsely, believe she admires, end quote. These modes of conduct are masculine, they are in the interest of a man, and does not include the experience or conduct of the feminine. And this denial of the maternal society feels its consequences. Castellanos then stresses, rather than the idea of hysteria and culture, her focus is on sickness and work. In terms of work, work has primarily, Castellanos argues, been for men. As most know, women weren't allowed in the workforce through much of history. And I won't say all, as there are still many women in history who worked as medics and other jobs that were generally made for, or done by men, as in the case of our beloved Hildegard de Bingen, who Castellanos brings up in her discussion of culture. Castellanos argues that many women were unable to support themselves if they were not in religion or prostitution or other roles like it, but a community emerged, the sanatoriums, in which women could take refuge. This is the idea of sickness as community, rather than the idea of hysteria. The community was better, but not enough. However, after the First World War is when women were allowed to enter the working class, including creative work. Castellanos then argues against the Freudian idea that women do not sublimate their urges, since culture is the sublimation of instincts. Castellanos argues that this is no longer the case, that women cannot sublimate their sexual impulses and transform them into cultural, moral, and creative interests. Because women are made aware of their sexuality, quote, sublimation is now an experience shared by women. Culture will be its fruit, end quote. Castellanos then comes to women's writing. Women have been denied the right to write, both culturally and psychologically. Just as Cixous argues, women are made to feel that their writing is not enough, that they cannot write, that they are not good enough. However, quote, it is in literature that we find in abundance the fruits of the feminine creative activity exiled from maternity, end quote. Women come to writing as an outlet and, quote, finding themselves in need of letting themselves go, of transcendence, they encounter another channel, the literary. And it does not matter if it is adequate or not, so long as it is possible. And they pour themselves into it, end quote. Women write and find refuge in writing as an outlet for their sublimated experiences. Rather than writing in the way that men do, quote, to broaden their limits, to conquer the land, to give nature an echo, end quote, women come to writing for the opposite need. Women write, quote, to set her limits, to affirm herself solidly within her individuality, to give herself her own echo, end quote. Women's writing is a writing of autobiography. to give herself, she writes herself through the I. It is in autobiography that reinstates women into history, an autobiography that is seen through the eyes of man's culture as narcissism. The idea that women's writing is narcissistic stems from the idea that they choose to write about themselves, about their experience, about their object rather than other topics. Castellanos identifies that there are women who seek to overcome this narcissism, which she does not argue is a bad thing. But she argues instead that women should be allowed to write anything, be it an autobiography, a novel, or anything else. Women can and should write anything as contribution to culture in a maternal sense. Castellanos' hope is that women do not run away from themselves in their writing, encouraging them to turn to their own experience, their own being, and liberate their expression. In The Laugh of Medusa, Cixous stresses how women repress their urges to write, saying, quote, "I know why you haven't written, because writing is at once too great and too high for you. It's reserved for the great, that is, great men, and it is silly," end quote. Besides, you've written a little, but in secret, end quote. And for me, this is true. I have a distinct memory of writing poetry in middle school, poetry that was no doubt bad if I were to read it now. But the reason I stopped is for the reason Cixous suggests. My writing was false. My writing was not for me. My writing used big words, and it felt silly coming from the pen of a young girl. Truly, I did this writing in secret. I hid my poetry from my sisters and everyone else because I was afraid of being made fun of. It was not only until I was much older that I found the courage to write. It was after I went to a psych ward for a second time after my sister had attempted suicide. She's fine. She's doing really well. I love her very much. But it took me analyzing my psychological limits. It took me going to a sanatorium to love writing and know that writing is for me. I wrote through I wrote my experience, I wrote my autobiography, and I will not be ashamed of it. Nor will I run from the expression of myself and my experiences as a woman. I also come from a family of only women. My father left when I was around 12 and thus left a household that lacked in many senses. My mother, one of the strongest people I know, was left with 5 young women to take care of, alone. She worked hard, she did what she could. The maternal is essential to my life and my childhood. I only knew maternal. But the culture that I faced outside of the home was not maternal, just as Castellanos argues. I knew and know the value of women. I knew what was missing. But the many patriarchal and male-dominated spaces I inhabited did not. Even now, even in this very department, I feel that void, the maternal lack, the lack of the écriture féminine, as many of the men among us and many of the men in our field have not found their own écriture féminine, and who feel they must take refuge in culture to make up for this missing maternal. Yesterday, I gave my first presentation for the Society of Phenomenology and Media, and when I think on it now, I did as Cixous argued. As I spoke, it was as if I was flying. I threw myself into that presentation, and I inscribed my writing through my body. As I speak now, I feel the same way. How do women write? They write through experience. They write in a way that liberates. They write from an experience and a pain that only women know. Women write for women, for themselves, and for their future. As a closing statement, I would like to dedicate this presentation to my mom, my sisters, and all the women I have had the pleasure to love and grow with. To be a woman is to be mother, sister, daughter to all women. To the men, my only hope is that you too find within you the écriture féminine and allow women into your history and into your culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Kylie. That was incredible. It was really moving. I appreciate you sharing your experiences as well, I think. Yeah, it's very good. But in the interest of time, we'll keep moving. Next up is Jasmin Makhlouf, a beloved PhD student in our department whose research involves the rigorous assessment and application of the phenomenology of Edmund Husserl to social phenomena such as race, disability, and illness. And on that note, she will now present her phenomenological analysis of racial microaggressions.
Thank you, Samantha. Let's
ready?
turn. I'm ready. I don't know if they are ready though.
It's a big reveal.
This is,
All right.
Do we have a drum roll?
you can still do it. It's time.
Oh my god.
It was either this or 25 slides, so I think this will have to work. All right. Oh, okay. Hold on, I need my marker because I will definitely. Hold on. All right. So, thank you so much, Samantha, for putting this together and giving us the space to present our ideas. That's incredible. And I just want to make sure, can everyone see? Okay, good. Let me just bring it to the front a little bit more under the light. All right, so this is a very important project for me. This way? Okay. This is a very important project for me because this is an experience I think that everyone goes through, either from one side of it or the other. So this is something that I would like to start with today. And first, I should maybe tell you the title of my paper. It's a work in progress, and I'm working on it, and I'm on the way to send it to a publisher, but it feels like the edits are never coming to an end. But so the title of my paper today, my project is called Unintending, a Phenomenological Analysis of Racial Microaggressions. And I'm reading it because I changed it so many times, I no longer remember the title of it. So let's start. The first question that I would like to ask you is, do you know what a microaggression is? Yes? Have you ever been the target of a microaggression? Have you ever been the one perpetrating the microaggression? Okay, now, what I want us to do is that, because people think that philosophy is just this abstract thing that you can do anything with, but you can do a lot of things with it. And what I want you to do right now is think of a day or a moment or a time in your lifetime where you were the perpetrator of a microaggression. And I want you to think of that moment, because what we're going to do today is going to be a retroactive analysis of that moment. And this is possible if we look at that moment through the concept or the realm of passivity that Husserl, he doesn't specifically define passivity, but he talks extensively about it in analysis of active and passive synthesis. And this is going to be the main text and the main philosophical framework for the talk. And then a second framework is the framework of the Phenomenology of Hesitation by Ali Assaji. So these are the two philosophers that we're looking at today. And what I'm trying to do is use their words to try and understand where do racial microaggressions in specific come from, how they're sedimented, what happens here, right? Because this is a very important point of the encounter. And then what can we do to fix that? And so the main argument, I don't want to stand in front of so that people in the second seat. The main argument of the paper is that most of the time, racial microaggressions are unintended, right? We don't mean it. We didn't mean to say something, we didn't mean to do something, but we did. And so, yes, Husserl can tell us why those racial microaggressions are unintended, but at the same time, Husserl gives us the chance for self-reflection. And through self-reflection, it's like you can check yourself, right? You're like, okay, what am I doing? Who am I? Why am I perpetrating this microaggression? And so Husserl gives us the reason why this happens, but it also tells us, you know what? We can fix this. And so the idea here is that when you think of the time you were a racial microaggressor, okay, I'm kidding, you're probably not, but think of that time, try to look at it through the steps that we will go through during the presentation. So we all know what's a racial microaggression. We have established that, but can anyone tell me what a racial microaggression is? Because you may know, but sometimes it's very hard to verbalize it. Think about it. I also have a definition if someone doesn't have it, so don't worry too much. That's my first, I should present it to you. So the dictionary definition of a microaggression is a comment or action that subtly and often unconsciously or unintentionally expresses a prejudiced attitude toward a member of a marginalized group. And here I prefer the word unintending, because intentionality is already a language that Husserl uses and we don't want to mix that up. And unconsciously is something, unconscious doesn't exist here, okay? So my Freudians, I apologize. This is not repression, this is not unconscious, this is a completely different level. And so we start in the realm of the unintended, right? And so I want you to imagine this scene where you're on the bus and there's this imaginary old lady and a Black person comes on the bus and this lady does this to her purse. She clutches tight onto her purse. Or imagine, I think Yancey uses this in one of his articles, a Black man entering the elevator and the sudden immediate reaction that takes place, like physically moving away from that subject or that person, right? Or think about a Muslim woman wearing a veil at TSA. Think about that, okay? I want you to see those images in your head. So Husserl tells us that through passivity, we can understand where these racial microaggressions come from, how they're sedimented, how they're created, and then the whole development of this attitude that transforms or becomes embodied and turns into a racial microaggression. And so, as I said, Husserl does not give us a clear definition of what passivity is, but Steinbach, in the introduction to the analysis, he gives us multiple possible interpretations for passivity. And for the sake of my example, I'm just using 4 different understandings. So we're looking at passivity as primordial genesis, and I'm gonna tell you what that is. But we have primordial genesis, and then we have passivity as the realm of the inactive ego. And then number 3, we have passivity as the realm of bodily sedimentation, or of sedimentation of bodily habits. And then number 4, we have passivity as the sphere of forgiveness, which has given us a very, very interesting topic for debate before and forever, because what is forgiveness? Nobody knows. I think I do, maybe, we'll figure it out. And so these are the 4 interpretations that I'm using for the idea of passivity and the realm of passivity itself. And then we're gonna look again at hesitation, which is this very interesting concept that Al-Sajid brings for us, and I think works very well with what happens after we snap out of the moment after the racial microaggression. So let's begin with something that I think most of us are already aware of, and that is that our first encounter with race is always heavily mediated by the way we're socialized, by the racialization of specific minorities and groups in society. And so we have our experience, maybe our parents, stranger danger, but if the stranger is Black, extra danger, right? So we have all these kind of experiences, and we receive all these kind of messages from society, history, and all of these different factors. They contribute to this very first experience, the primordial genesis, right? This very first experience where the encounter is mediated by racialized perception, right? Or racialized understanding of the subject. And in the paper, I'm particularly speaking about Black people in the US, because I think, first of all, it was easier and more relatable for the reader. And I think this is important. Culturally speaking, it's important to provide examples that are relatable. But this can also apply to other races or minorities. So like think of like a Muslim woman or a Muslim man, someone whose name is Ahmad, you know, or different other stereotypes that are associated with other ethnicities. I think it works with like every single experience, although every experience is different. So I'm not universalizing the experience. So here we have this first encounter, and we have this very much racialized and mediated understanding of the Black subject, right? And so we go through life, and as we go through life, as we grow up, we see in TV, like TV shows and films and on the news, Black person murders, I don't know how many people. There's like a specific cherry picking process whereby this is created in order for us to have this first encounter sedimented to create a racial unity of sense. So what is a racial unity of sense? We need to understand that for Husserl, consciousness by nature tends to unify things so they make sense for you. So you don't have like scattered sense of self, or, you know, time in a way is kind of linear within yourself, right? And this is particularly important for phenomenologists because disabilities like ADHD or Alzheimer's or degenerative illnesses for the brain kind of mess this up. And so it's always interesting to look at it through a phenomenological lens, like what happens. And so these ideas and these racialized perceptions are sedimented into this racial unity of sense. And so we have this understanding, a unified understanding that agree with like, or align with statements like all Black people are dangerous, right? We go through life and we see passivity as this place where this first encounter is born and this idea is sedimented, right? And here we encounter racialized perception. What is racialized perception? With racialized perception, we have a perception that is mediated by certain social markers. And I think an important thing that we need to mention here is the work of Al-Saji and Alkov and also Fanon. Because if you recall, if you ever read Fanon, if you recall, the color of the skin, Black skin, becomes a social marker, right? And the social marker affects perception and affects the way the person perceives the subject as almost like a half-formed object, right? And so we have racialized perception in this process. But the thing is, we go through life, and then for consciousness, or for Husserl, for Husserl, consciousness, the expectations of consciousness are always, it's the norm for these expectations to be fulfilled. So if every time I encounter a Black person, I see the Black person being homeless, or a drunk, or an addict, or a criminal, my expectations of Black people is fulfilled. But it reaches a point where this expectation will be unfulfilled or will be partially fulfilled. And this is the moment of the truth, right? This is where we'll get with, the end of the racial microaggression. So here we have, I just take you, I do like a little bit like Husserl does, that he goes back and then comes back again. So we have this part, and I think this part is clear. We understand racialized perception. And because this has been sedimented into consciousness, right? Something else has been sedimented, and that is bodily habit. And this is the clutching of the bag. With this step, we're this understanding of passivity as a realm where there's habits embodied, right? There's bodily habits that are, they're just reflexes. It just happen automatically, right? It's like you see something coming at you, you do this, right? It's the same exact thing. The idea is that you may ask why the body? Because for Husserl, consciousness is always embodied consciousness. And so there's always a connection between consciousness and the body. They're not separate. You are an embodied being. And this is why there's sedimentation in the body of specific habits like clutching a bag or even avoiding to meet people of color or people of other ethnicities. And so the sedimentation happens here, and of course, it is reflected in the body. The idea is that when the lady clutches the bag, she doesn't think, oh, Black person, clutch the bag. She doesn't think that. It comes automatically. And this is because passivity is the realm of the inactive ego. And this is what makes racial microaggressions mostly unintentional or unintended, not unintentional, unintended. And you may ask, what does it mean to be inactive? So the idea is that the ego, imagine the ego being there, but as a bystander, right? It's overlooking everything, but it's there. And so because it's there, so it's inactive, there's no active engagement, but at the same time, it's there. And so my argument here is that, okay, we can consider this racial microaggressions as unintended, but because the ego is there, then you can still you can still hold yourself accountable for it. And because you can still hold yourself accountable for it, there must be a way for us to break this cycle, okay? So we got the sedimentation, we got why this happens, we see the process of racialization, we understand racialized perception, we see that these perception and sedimentations are also reflected on bodily movements and habits, and so we understand the clutching, and we do understand that they're unintended because the ego is inactive, but it's there, and so we can still be held accountable for it. So what happens now? The subject of my inquiry is the subject that does not consider themselves as a racist, right? They don't consider themselves as racist. They don't associate with racist organization. Oh my God, Sam, sorry. I'm just gonna stand here. I apologize. I didn't realize he was following me. Okay. So it's the subject that doesn't want to be racist and doesn't consider themselves racist, okay? So someone like us, right? None of us associates with that, hopefully. None of us associates with that, and nobody wants to be a racist. But sometimes it's out of our hands. There's some things that are so embedded into us that we're like, why am I doing this, right? So sometimes one of my cousins, I'll explain to you why I'm saying this. One of my cousins wear the niqab, right? And this one time, in the middle of the night, she comes to me and I got scared. I was like, what is that entity moving in the dark, right? And she wears all black niqabi, right? And I was like, okay, I was like, why did I do that? Whoa, what did I just do? Like, she's a Muslim like me, right? There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that the context made me react in a particular way. But the idea with racial microaggressions is that most often people who are not racist, after they do that racial microaggression, they say something like, oh, you speak so well. They mean it as a compliment, right? But then you're like, oh, okay, this is not really a compliment. And there's a moment of reflection. And so this is when, the moment after the microaggression, here's when you snap out of it. And here is where there's a re-engagement of the ego. So this is when we go out of the passive realm. We're in the passive realm for all of this. So the reason why they're unintended and how they sedimented and the bodily habits and everything. And then once the racial microaggression, we go back to activity. And so the ego re-engages and you snap out of it and you ask yourself, what did I just do? Why did I say that, right? And so in this moment, when the expectation of the racist expectation is not fulfilled in consciousness, something good comes out of it. And this is the rise of the otherwise lived experience or the lived experience of otherwise, right? What is that? So consciousness, imagine it as, okay, I'm not gonna walk, I'm gonna stay here. Do you know those tapes where they would like record, there's a film, you have a cassette, and you watch it, but then you can raise the stuff that's on the cassette and then you can record something else. This is what happens. This is what the otherwise does, right? To consciousness and the sedimentation of this racial unitive sense. This is broken when you encounter a person of color, a Black person who does not fulfill the expectation of, whoa, criminal or homeless or drug addict, right? And so one by one, these experiences kind of break this sedimentation and they replace it with something else. So it's like overriding on that cassette, right? And this is important for us because it gives us the space for the encounter to move from this to this, right? And so we have the re-engagement of the ego, you snap out of it and you're like, okay, what did I do? Because you realize that person did not do anything to me, right? All these expectations that I had were not fulfilled, right? This can also happen. And I think people, when they think of expectations, they think of like romantic stuff. Yeah, like my romantic expectations were not fulfilled. But the idea is that this process can be applied to anything. You can understand any kind of experience through like this passive regressive analysis. And so here we come, we realize we've been racial microaggressors. We have experiences that break this understanding or this racial unity of sense that we have of a particular race. And the object of our perception is no longer an object that is racialized and marked by specific racial characteristics. And so in passivity, we can also understand passivity to be this kind of realm of pre-givenness, right? And so there's a lot of debate about pre-givenness, but in this, so pre-givenness is the idea that everything is always there for you, ready to appear to you, right? Even if you're not, it's like, okay, let me give you an example. Hold this, put it behind your back. Put it behind your back, like hide it from me. I don't see it. So there's the pre-givenness of the object of being there and of being experienced, even though I'm not experiencing it at the moment, right? And then there's the givenness of the object, and this is how the appearance appears to me, shows itself to me. For me, pre-givenness, yes, that works. But in this context, the pre-givenness of the object of the Black person, in this case, in the analysis that I'm conducting in the paper, is that it's always a racialized pre-givenness. I don't see a man, or I don't just see a woman, I see a Black man, or I see a Black woman. There is always some kind of qualifying word or adjective of that particular noun, right? And so in passive synthesis, when we're still in the moment where there's racial unity of sense and being sedimented, I see Black people as Black people, not just people. And this contributes to the racial microaggression. But we have overcome this moment, and now we can move to the concept of hesitation. For Asaji, this is a very useful concept because it's this temporal moment, the situation right before the racial microaggression happens, where you hold yourself accountable, you hold yourself in check, right? And so hesitation is very important after we realize what we've done, after after the expectation of consciousness is unfulfilled and is broken, and we see the rise of the lived experience of otherwise. We have this moment where we're like, okay, right, so next time I see a person of color, I'm not gonna do that. You're becoming more and more aware of yourself. You're hesitating, right? So temporally, this happens right before the encounter, right? Because there's an immediacy in the racial microaggression as all of these things are being sedimented within consciousness and the body, right? So here there's an immediacy of reaction. While once we realize what we've done, and as a self-reflective subject, you're like, okay, I need a moment to understand why I did that. Like you put yourself in check, right? You have this moment of hesitation. And so my conclusion is that Husserl helps us understand what happens. And because we understand what happens, we can actually change this and hold ourselves accountable. And even if I say, oops, sorry, I didn't mean it, it doesn't matter. You still need to be held accountable for this. And some people are like, oh, but I didn't mean it. No, but there's a reason why you didn't mean it, and you need to understand why you didn't mean it in order for you to change. And so an option is that one way of having the cassette overwritten is that we try to engage more in community and try to understand the other more as the other, as another subject, and try to hesitate. You know, when people say, oh, don't hesitate. No, I actually hesitate. Hesitate a lot. Hesitate, take a moment to breathe, like check yourself after every single interaction. You need to understand, okay, did I do that right? Or did I do that wrong? Or what should I do to make myself a better, a more civil human being? Okay, I think we've reached the end of my diagram. And that's it. Thank you very much. I'm okay with time, right? Excellent.
Thank you so much. That was also incredible. I want to pull up a couple chairs so we can. I didn't even think
Oh,
about
okay,
that.
chairs, sure.
Yeah,
I got it. Don't worry, Kylie, don't worry.
we got it. We got it.
Okay.
And I hope I'm relatively good. So for the Q&A, I have a couple questions I'd like to ask
Do you want to sit in the middle?
our speakers.
Oh yeah, you since
want
you're
me
the
to-
respondent, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Here we go. This works. So thank you again, both. Something I'm thinking about hearing both of your presentations and tying them together. This is what jumped out to me personally is, for you is this notion of a limit. For Jasmin, I think it's this sort of moment of an unfilled expectation. But my first question on that sort of line of reasoning is to you, Kylie, and it is a little vague, but especially when you were sharing your experience, which was really impactful, and I really appreciate you sharing it. I'm curious either for yourself or more broadly for this concept of a specifically feminine writing that you're interested in mobilizing and utilizing. What does this moment of the limit mean for that sort of thing? Like, is there a significant part of it? Because it seems to me like, just when I was listening to you, you really described a moment where you, it was really impactful, which is why I'm asking about it.
No, I mean, it really was a moment. I mean, like, I distinctly remember the moment I had in the psych ward where I was like, fuck it, I can write.
Right.
Like, I can do whatever I want. Like, I don't care, you know, whether this is good poetry. I don't care whether or not, like, you know, my sister or anyone else is going to think that it's silly. Like, I don't think it's silly anymore. So it was like this, you know, I was in this community, and it was, a lot of it was also because we had like an art therapist. And it was this community in which I, you know, was kept in, that allowed me to understand how I was limiting myself. So it's not necessarily like the limit is necessary.
Get kicked out for a minute.
So maybe this is something Castellanos would say, but it's not just like this individualized limit, because that was honestly one of my instincts was to think about it as your limit, but you just described it in a way to where actually the limit was facilitated by the limit, and in a space where you could be around them and experience yourself with them. So
No, I think so, definitely. That it's, I mean, a general limit that I think Cixous and Castellanos would say exists just in general, like being in a patriarchal society that doesn't respect or, you know, revere maternity in a non-patriarchal way. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
Like, yes, we respect mothers and things like that, but that's not just maternity. And
Right.
I don't know, maybe I'm like going off on a completely different thing.
Maybe
but-
maternity is more than just.
Yeah, no, exactly.
There's a lot that could be said there. That's awesome. But Jasmin, I'm just gonna turn to you, and I know we've had a lot of conversations about your incredible analysis, but since I've put my money on the moment of expectation, I actually want to talk about that and the relationship with hesitation. I think I love about your analysis is, again, you frame this moment of hesitation in terms of the reflective, you know, the ethical reflection of what did I say? But I think in most cases, we don't get to that point. Like, there's either something in a way we don't say, I mean, we might even have that moment of hesitation, for example, that we, you know, react in a way that's sort of, maybe you get angry, maybe you double down, or maybe you say, or maybe just flat out deny. So I'm curious if there isn't a sort of, if you don't see potential difficulty with sort of getting to a point where we can hesitate properly and adequately.
I think because ultimately the subject does not live in a vacuum and it naturally interacts with other subjects, and we know from Husserl that this is a social, oh my god, you're recording me, okay. This is a social world that we're living in, so this, I think that here, if this doesn't happen naturally, then it will happen by someone holding you accountable for it, right? Someone who will tell you, okay, this is not right. And in the most unfortunate event that you live in a community that is completely and totally isolated and is not exposed to diversity whatsoever, then there must be a moment of at least like self-reflection, right? Because you don't just do things and then that's it. But I see that that can be an issue. And this is why, like in the beginning of the paper, I was like, I'm looking at people like us. I'm looking at self-reflective subjects who actually reflect over their own actions and their encounters with other people, right? And I think that this can be something that will definitely help the analysis, because what about the subject who's not a self-reflective subject, right?
What about the subject who thinks they're a self-reflecting subject, but actually aren't as self-reflective as they think they are?
Yes,
We all
yes.
have
I mean,
experienced.
I feel like these people, usually they're called out by people who care for a community and care for safe encounters. But but this analysis can definitely tell you exactly what happened. So if we look at the racist subject, we can definitely use this side of the analysis to understand why this happened, right? But I think that what will be missing from the experience of the racist subject encountering a person of color is this. And I think that hesitation can only work once there's the realization that, oh God, I've done something wrong, right? Yeah.
I think also your emphasis on the community really helps put that in perspective for me.
Yeah.
Being reminded, being pushed, that seems insignificant enough here. Anyways, those are my questions. I want to open it up to the floor. Any and all questions? John Henry?
I'm awaiting.
Yeah.
I want to be the first to go.
You too.
I thank you both of you. It was really
Yeah.
so amazing and great. My question's mostly for Jasmin, not.
Fellow
I'm an
Husserlian.
Australian too. So
That's,
myself.
please, all you, all you. Psychoanalysis over here.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was so interesting, guys. Like, so I guess like just two questions I'm just really curious about. Like, do you think this is like half of the story, and we also need like an account of the recipient in the microaggression?
Yes.
And so, okay, I'm just curious about that. Simple.
I think that what can be very helpful for us in understanding the recipient of the microaggression is that very often in the passive realm, the object, so the subject of color is not viewed as a subject, but is seen as or perceived as a partially formed object. And we see this in Fanon, we see this in Al-Saji, and we see this in phenomenologists who talk and describe and analyze experience, right? And so the idea is that not only the perpetrator sees the Black person as an object and it has a very particular allure, like the pull of the object, like the pull that the object has on the subject, and that pull is the color of the skin for Black persons. And the idea is that Fanon also speaks about how the Black man sees himself, right? And this is in connection to this kind of understanding of passivity that we have here with Husserl. And so you're right, this is just the half of the perpetrator. But unfortunately, I have a feeling that when we look at the experience of the person that is being targeted by the microaggression, there is going to be an interior kind of experience of the aggression, but there will also be this kind of ambivalence between, oh, I am the object of the gaze of the white man, but I also am myself a subject. And so I think there's going to be this kind of ambivalence or ambiguity between this like subject-object kind of understanding. And it's not the same thing where there's this idea of double sensation in Husserl, where like you touch your right hand with your left hand and vice versa. I get always confused. But there's this understanding of the body as an object, a very special kind of object, but it's different. It's not that way, because all of us kind of have this understanding of our bodies as special kinds of objects. But I think that it's more of the way Alkov talks about it when she comments on Sotomayor's speech about the Latina judge, where she says there's an objective social identity and there's a subjective social identity. And the objective social identity is the identity that we construct ourselves based on how others perceive us, right? And so I think that that's something that we need to mention. Did it help?
No, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Is that okay? I mean, I'm sorry.
Is that okay?
Yeah, well, does anyone else have a?
Yeah.
That's one open real quick. If no one else does, I say go for it. Oh, you got one from CP.
Thank you so much for both presentations. And my question is to Kylie. Thank you so much. Your presentation is really, really powerful. I hope that who should understand it can understand it after that. So my question is about, I hope that you might have more thoughts on this because when you were talking about women write autobiographies and you mentioned that this is not a narcissism, but it's by returning to the self, the women liberate themselves. And I just want to know, do you have more to say about it in terms of from the perspective of psychoanalysis?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the great things about Castellanos and Cixous is that they both work from psychoanalysis. Like both of them bring Freud into it. I am just simply like, I know Lacan much better than I know Freud, and so I know Freud through Lacan, which is not as helpful. But Cixous does also talk about Lacan in the sense of lack and all those kinds of things. But I think like for both of them, you know, a psychological understanding of the self is very important, and I think that what they are both stressing is how society forces one psychological understanding in one way or the other, mostly a phallocentric understanding of the self. And, you know, this is where Lacan's idea of the lack comes from, is that there is the castration of, like, you know, the women don't have penises, like, obviously, but, well, not always obviously, but anyways, you know, so that, it, you know, Cixous argues that it's not a lack. That really, this is, I think, where this idea of maternity from Castellanos can be brought into it. Gosh, it's so hard because like there's so many great things working in both of these essays, and if anyone wants to read them, I would love to share them with you. But this idea that by understanding herself, not through this patriarchal, phallocentric idea of lack or castration, by understanding herself through her writing, through her subjectivity, through her own experience, an experience of a woman that is unlike that of a man, despite the fact that, you know, phallocentric society encourages us to think as men, which is also something Castellanos is trying to argue against, is that in this culture, in culture that has been created by man, the women who have been brought into culture or history are doing it because they are doing it in the way that men think culture should be experienced or created. Yeah. I hope that helped. I feel like I went everywhere, but
Yeah. Awesome. And we can return to John Henry if we would like to, but I would also like to offer a moment if Abigail, Joe, Katie, Sierra, Dr. Bowman, if any of y'all just have comments or thoughts too, I'd love to hear them. So you don't have to, but I just wanted to kind of call you out. I just want to hear what you all have to say. Let's go Abigail and then we'll go to Katie.
Oh, Katie, go first.
Okay, Katie, then Abigail.
I don't want to take the kind of focus away from the experience of like writing from a female perspective, and so if you think it's too far off, that I totally understand. But I'm interested in how you mentioned Cixous saying that eventually this like écriture féminine is also used to liberate men as well, but keeping that in tension with I forget if it was Cixous or Castellanos who talks about women necessarily don't have the kind of like repression that men have.
yeah, that's Castellanos who's
Yeah.
talking about the sublimation.
So how can it kind of be like a liberatory thing when it seems like there's this kind of like innate gendered sense in which men are necessarily more like repressed or don't have the ability to like engage with writing in the way that she's speaking about in a liberatory sense?
Yeah. So I want, first I will highlight the quote from Cixous, the La Medusa, that she discusses men and écriture féminine. So the quote is, I write woman, woman must write woman, and man, man. So only an oblique consideration will be found here of man. It's up to him to say where his masculinity and femininity are at. This will concern us once men have opened their eyes and seen themselves clearly. So
I think this idea, there's definitely like kind of a contention between this idea of écriture féminine and then sublimation in Castellanos, and like écriture féminine being, you know, obviously not inaccessible to men, but more difficult in a way that if they're not acknowledging their femininity. So I guess, you know, it could be said that because écriture féminine is about understanding for men, for a man to like understand écriture féminine, is understanding their femininity. I think maybe there is value, and you know what? This is exactly why I wish I could have gone like further into the essay, because Cixous does talk more about bisexuality and like I think this idea of like masculine feminine within one person. So I think this idea of bisexuality in that way works well with Castellanos's idea of sublimation being accessed by women in a way that women, maybe it could be said, balances this bisexuality within themselves that allows them to access culture and écriture féminine. That's my on-the-fly answer. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Jasmin, but I have the opposite problem with John Henry, where I can't engage with Husserl. So your talk was very interesting and I loved it, but I'm going to ask Kiley another question, and it's not because of you, it's just because I don't know Husserl. So I'm sorry. But what I did want to ask you, Kiley, since you brought up Hildegard, I think that there's something really interesting that happens in the history of philosophy when we look at the history of gender and the history of medical understandings of philosophy, which I think psychoanalysis certainly has a medical role to play, where you see from very early on this notion that there's this created male being, and then there's sort of the woman that comes along as sort of the she has what he doesn't, she's the lack, she's the opening, she's the blah, blah. And that lots of writers and thinkers, particularly French thinkers in the 20th century, really leaned into this idea that there is no woman, there is no concept of a woman, there is no concept of any of these things, women don't exist, and which they never say about men, and which everybody really wants to make sure that I know isn't really what they mean.
Of course.
But I think one thing that's really cool about Hildegard as a foil against all of that is that she's really unencumbered by that history from the medical tradition, from early writers onward, and she really posits an opposite kind of role for women, which is that there are two creations, there are men and there are women, and they just kind of exist almost as like separate beings in certain ways. She doesn't really take like a Adam Eve from the rib sort of view. She has a very like rich account of women, and even men and women of the same humoral temperaments display those temperaments very, very differently, and she doesn't talk about them in the context of one another really. The man doesn't shed any light on the woman and vice versa. It is really interesting, I think. No, I agree, thank you. And so and it kind of seemed like, and I'm so sorry, Castellanos, Cixous Castellanos is hard for me with this.
Oh, I know. I made it difficult for everyone.
No. It seems like Castellanos is kind of encouraging a line of thinking along in that tradition, that like we don't really need to almost engage with these people who are sort of focused on this lack talk. And I wonder if you feel like there's ever any kind of tension for you in thinking about these things with the psychoanalytic lens, and how you kind of think about that, how you still make psychoanalysis valuable and fruitful in that way without just sort of kind of rejecting it or moving away from it. I'm so sorry, this is a really long question.
No, that's okay. Thank you for the background on Hildegard. I love learning more about her. She is incredible. Castellanos just kind of gives her a little shout out of being like, she wrote a really good treatise. And so I just felt like I had to include it for you. I mean, I think part of my experience as a philosopher and a woman philosopher who's interested in psychoanalysis, especially Lacan, tough to defend as a woman, and frankly, I won't. He was a bad guy. He wrote bad stuff about women, and I agree with Cixous that this idea of castration and lack is not valid. It's like the wrong way, I think, to think about it. But unfortunately, like, maybe it's useful. I haven't read that much about it. So I do feel like the more I write and the more I learn and the more I read, and I write as a woman in these fields and these male-dominated spaces, I think I'm learning that, unfortunately, I don't know, maybe I'm just not like Hildegard, that we have to take the tools and use them how we can. I think until maybe, like, one would hope that we get to a world in which people are teaching Hildegard and more people know that that is what she thought about, you know, subjectivity of man and woman.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a good answer. I don't even know if that really answered it, but.
I appreciate like the perspectives of using tools that they already have.
Yeah. Like, it's unfortunate. I would love to not have to do that. But I mean, like, the people that I have been taught, like, I taught myself Cixous. I taught myself Castellanos.
I know. I mean,
like, why? Why was that, you know? And I went to two incredible places to learn philosophy, and I'm happy with the philosophy that I've learned. But I have missed out on so much because no one taught me these people the way that I wish I could have learned. Learning on my own, incredible. I loved it. I really enjoyed, like, this is the reason and this is what I want to do now. Would have been great to learn from someone who knew more than I did just reading it by myself, you know?
I also understand, I mean, your story about being in the hospital too is like maybe part of our ability to actually engage and realize these with these texts, these feminist texts, as women requires that communal aspect, and it seems like that denial might be insidiously playing into, you know, I mean, I'm glad you read it on your own, but also I know how incredibly, when you're already a graduate student, when
I'm
you're
already
trying
afraid
to read
that
Hegel,
Yeah.
and then you're trying, like, that's not easy,
Yeah.
it takes a lot of physical
Well,
power to read through.
I'm mostly afraid that, like, I don't have anyone to ask to be like, did I do a good reading of this?
That's it, yeah.
No one, you know, no one can really tell me because it's not like they've done extensive work on it, on these thinkers. And so, unfortunately, like, I was scared to give this talk because I don't know if I did a good reading of them, because no one's here to tell me. And so I think that's, like, one of the really frustrating things about, like, the academia that I'm in, and that's less to do with my presentation and more to do with some of the issues of white male dominated academia. So I'll stop on that, but thank you.
Yeah, we're well over time, but I want to make space for one more comment or question from the audience.
So my question's for Jasmin.
I knew it.
Sorry in advance.
That's okay.
No, I really enjoyed your presentation, and I really enjoyed this initially perplexing graph that you drew for us.
That was very clear.
No, it is clear. It's just very term-heavy. Initially, it's scary. But no, it was really good, and this was really helpful in a lot of ways because it's very similar to a lot of, like, the own work I've done in the past before. And I want to kind of investigate this, like, kind of moment of, like, the breaking of the expectation with you, because in some ways, like, it feels like it's very kind of laden with potential here, because it's, like, in some ways a breakdown of, like, the way in which this person is, like, kind of rendering the world intelligible to them.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, is there a kind of, like, potential within this moment of breaking expectations for, in some way, like, I guess, positive potential to, like, change, like, kind of without, like, in some ways, by continually breaking expectations.
Oh.
So not just, like, kind of at once and, like, kind of relying on a reflection after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is not a one-time thing, right? Because the experience, the continuous unfulfillment expectation breaks the expectation, but then the fact that this expectation is unfulfilled, the new unfulfillment becomes the expectations of that kind of experience. And so this is why it's like it writes over. But you have to create a habit, to have a habit that becomes sedimented into consciousness, then you kind of have to experience this multiple times. It's like, for example, like my grandma did not appreciate that my dad was Muslim, but then with time, with constant engagement and experience, this kind of not liking, let's call it like that, kind of went away, right? Or at least it was no longer present in behavior, right? So I think there's not just, it's not the good or the potential, the positive potential of the moment is not just the moment itself, but it's also the reflection that comes after it. And because there is reflection after it, then every experience will want to follow the idea that, okay, I was racist and I perpetuated a racist microaggression, a racial microaggression. And so I do not do that again. And so the experience become positive, hopefully with time. This is a very, ideal situation where you do something wrong and then you're like, oops, no, that's bad, that's my bad. And so you reflect, right? This is a very ideal situation, but I'm sure that a lot of people have this kind of moment, but then they're kind of left stranded with themselves. However, the fact that they keep having positive, repeated experiences with people of color, other people of ethnicity, whatever, people that they thought were not good or did not have good or positive qualities or characteristics attributed to them, changes them. So yeah, it's not just in the single moment, but it's also in its repetition. But the repetition makes it the expectation. And so there's no more rise of the lived experience of the otherwise.
Can I follow up?
Yep, I mean, if Samantha
So
allows it.
my question, I think, is a little bit, no, I'm gonna add, not retroactively changing, sorry. I'm tripping over my words here, I'm sorry, I'm really tired. So I guess like my question, or my next question is like, how is it, or is this kind of repetition or habit necessary for kind of the positive aims of trying to get rid of a habit? Because it seems like that kind of reflection on this after the fact is about building a new habit in its place, or recoding. Do we need that in order to break a habit in some way? Or can we just rely on the kind of breaking of expectations? Because like I'm from kind of my own work with this in like similar kind of topic in neurodivergent circles, I'm hesitant about the idea that there is like something kind of positive about just making new expectations that we have of others. I think that's in some ways like kind of a dangerous thing that we should be careful for.
Yeah, I think that the rapture is important, but the rapture on its own, it's not going to be enough. It's necessary that there must be a repetition of good experience, right? And the thing is like, I think expectation is not, Husserl doesn't mean it expectation as in, I expect to be treated with respect. No, expectation is like, so 1 + 1 = 2. The 2 is the expectation, right? And so I think that expectation, from what I remember of our discussions on your work, I think the expectation that is put on a neurodivergent person is not the same expectation that we're talking about here. Because here the expectation is Black person, danger. And so we want to remove the danger part of the fulfillment of the expectations that is built on the racial unity of sense, right? And so we don't want 1 + 1 = 2 anymore. We don't want 1 + 1 to begin with, right? And so, of course, the rapture is important. This must happen, right? It's like every time you eat broccoli, like you get tummy ache. But then one day, I was gonna say something else, but then one day you eat broccoli and it doesn't give you tummy ache, right? So that breaks the cycle and you're like, oh, broccoli no longer gives me tummy ache. And so you try again the broccoli and you try it again from the same place, from the same cook, and then you realize that maybe it was a spice that they put in the other broccoli that you ate that gave you tummy ache, right? And so the rapture is important, but it's necessary that the positive experience is repeated. And this is why there must be a lot of community engagement. But also, this does not mean that the labor is thrown on the person that is being what's the verb for microaggression?
Microaggressed.
Yeah, microaggressed, right? It's not my job to make people
Exactly,
think that
yeah.
Muslims are not terrorists. Like, check yourself, you can do that yourself, right? But the rapture is important and it's necessary, there must be repetition in it. I hope this answers the
Yeah, I mean, I
question.
think we should probably discuss this further, like, by ourselves, because I don't wanna like drag the topic like way into something else too, which I
Yeah.
think I'd have to do to really respond, so.
I need to close things now, but I do want to say, I love this idea of check yourself.
Yeah,
As
check
having this-
yourself.
But having phenomenological weight, like you're not just saying like, look at your privilege or whatever, you're saying like, look at that moment of breakage and learn how to be an adult and process it over and over again. I think it's really awesome. Anyways, thank you both again for your excellent presentations. Really good work. I'm excited to see how they both keep on developing. We'll end things there. I want to thank everybody for coming and for the really insightful comments. I'm really happy that we could have this space. It was most excellent. Lastly, I just wanted to plug our next event with Matt.
Let's go.
John Henry will be sharing some of his research on Friday the 28th from 4 to 6 here in the Fem Center, titled Of Lexism and Its Discontents. But thanks again, everybody. Have a great
Thank
rest
you
of
to
your night.
Samantha.
Yeah, thank you. This was an excellent event, all because of you.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Alright, you can leave.
Turn that
No,
off.
I do need to get pictures of the video. I need to get a picture of this board. I need to get a picture